And yeah, over the last, I believe, over the last few weeks or a couple of months, you've been in this class exploring the Sangharavastus, which are the means of unification of the Sangha. So the Sangha being the community of practitioners. And I think the last time you had Steer Manis talking about loving speech, and before that we had generosity, and then I presume in the future we're having exemplification. But today I'll be talking about Arthacharya, which translates as beneficial activity. Well, yeah, the translation beneficial activity, it doesn't really excite me. It sounds very, okay, that sounds good. It's good to be of benefit to the world. But kind of preparing this talk, it's been really nice to explore where this comes from and why it's brought out so much in Buddhism. And obviously the other aspects like dana, which means generosity, Buddhism places high value on kind of sharing ourselves with the world, kind of sharing both materially but also the gift of the Dharma. So when you come here to Centre, you learn to meditate. That's people are acting on this sense of generosity. And then that's done ideally with this loving speech. So affectionate, warm kind of way of communicating with people. It's interesting with the Dharma, it's not so much you get people preaching, it's a communication. So it's a kind of seeing people where they're at and communicating on that basis. And that's often done with awareness of speech, loving speech. And then, yeah, beneficial. What I prefer to translate is doing good. And with any topic, I like to bring it back to the kind of root of what doing good and what it means for us. And what I'm sure a lot of people are doing now is I typed into ChatGPT and see what, or Google it used to be back in the day, about what is beneficial activity. And it lists loads of great things. And it's interesting, as soon as I was typing out the things, I was kind of rolling my eyes. It's like, oh, I know all this. I know what's good. So the kind of how we see doing good in the world can be both for ourselves or for others. And it says things like looking after yourself, so exercising well, eating well. And then it's also personal development, whether you upskill, you do things that improve your life in some way. And then also there's a social and engagement. So obviously there's a lot we could do environmentally or kind of areas of justice in the world. A lot of people go down that avenues thinking, here I am in the world and I want to make a difference, I want to do good for the world. But then the more you get to know me, I keep questioning things, and I'm like, well, to what end? Like, why do that? Why improve myself? Why try and engage with the world? And there's different avenues one can go down with that. And hopefully throughout the talk, I'm going to kind of see where it is and what that avenue comes from in the Buddhist context. So the sense of doing good, where that kind of comes from. But first, to kind of take a step back, if we're looking at doing good in the world, immediately what comes to mind is what's the purpose, what's the motivation behind it. It's very hard to argue to be kind, to argue against being kind or compassionate or generous. But I think it takes exceptional beings in the world to do that consistently for their whole life without some underlying meaning in their lives or some underlying purpose in their life. And I guess the kind of humanist way would be, well, you do that, you be kind to others. We're all humans. We're all trying to get by in this life, and we be kind and compassionate. And then that lives on in the memories of those who you're close to. A really great way of living in the world. But for me, that kind of, what's our kind of zone of interest with that sometimes, if it doesn't kind of reach beyond ourselves, if it's just for the sake of those around us that we're being kind to, how much are we stepping out into the world? And I guess a bit about myself, the this kind of way of thinking of trying to get the self to reach outward is a pretty new phenomenon. I've so kind of learned. Say back in the 18th century or so, before this idea of meaning or finding meaning wouldn't have been a question, particularly this part of the world. It was just came from God. It was a kind of Christian way of the question of what to do with your life wasn't particularly apparent. It's like, well, you serve God's word, you serve God's way of being. And I think we take that for granted, that we live in a society that doesn't have a collective kind of meaning to things. We're all kind of individually trying to figure it out. You might come along to a centre or watch endless YouTube videos to figure out what it is that's going to kind of engage me in life. But back then, for better or for worse, it was quite straightforward. And I grew up in quite a strong Catholic upbringing. And it's very interesting when I think back on it, that I was in life and there was an unwritten, unspoken way of being in the world, that this sense of goodness, this sense of reaching out to others came from another power through my parents, very culturally. And I've spent most of my life now grappling, undoing a lot of the work of Catholicism in my life. But there has been some positives. It did give a sense of the sacred, something more, something beyond us, which is a relief, if I'm honest. Once we realise that, well, actually I'll say a bit about in a bit, but I remember I was in school, my tech graph teacher, he was an atheist, and I used to have debates with him as a 16-year-old about how true the Bible was, and I really was kind of putting a flag up for Catholicism. But then, and that kind of gave me a purpose. I had something to say, albeit it wasn't very embodied. I was just saying what I was told growing up. But I remember being 19 or so, and there was this, obviously, with my friends in school, I lived in rural Ireland, so the middle of nowhere, and there was this caravan that all the young guys would go down to in the fields, hidden away, thinking our parents didn't know where it was. And we used to drink there together, so we'd have late nights and we'd be drinking cans or whatever in this caravan. And I was really grappling at this point with the church and how I was going to Mass every week and starting to not quite believe in it, what I was being told. And I remember a good friend of mine, still a good friend, Brendan, and I always had usually with guys that age, you need a few drinks in order to open up. And something I'm very grateful for with Buddhist centres, that I've been able to be with other men and being able to open up without the need of going to a pub. So I was having this heart-to-heart, and Brendan, the friend of mine, was a very staunch atheist and quite proud of it. And I let my pride go, and I was like, oh, you know what, Brendan, I don't believe in God anymore. And for me, that was a sad event, because suddenly a rug was taken out from beneath me in terms of a way to live. And then I remember later on I started reading more about philosophers and stuff, and came across Nietzsche's comment, God is dead, God remains dead, and we have killed him. And often that phrase is used as a kind of wrong view of a triumphant, okay, we don't believe in this being that's caused a lot of harm. He actually saw it as more of a conundrum. What are we to do with our lives now that we don't have something given a clear path? And I felt that. It wasn't a triumphant moment. But then I tried for the next few years. I was in uni. I tried to be an atheist. Well, actually, I succeeded in that. Yeah, an atheist being someone who doesn't believe in a creator God. So I couldn't get behind that. But then I couldn't quite. The natural tendency is to become a nihilist, where you don't believe that life has meaning, or that you live this life as best we can and we die and then that's it. I couldn't believe in it. It is a belief. And I think this positive side of a transcendental element in my life, something beyond myself, went deep, and I kind of believed in that more. So here I was with a situation where I couldn't quite believe in nihilism, and I couldn't quite believe in eternalism. And I started exploring different philosophies, different way of life. And lo and behold, I came across, actually through Taoism, I eventually came into Buddhism. And here was the Buddha teaching the middle way, that a way in life that doesn't fall into extremes. And I guess to look at, I always like going back to the Buddha's life. Obviously, if you weren't here in the first half, there's usually a big rupa of the Buddha here, but it's being restored at the moment. And but here we've got green Tara, which is an archetypal Buddha, which represents particular qualities of the enlightened mind. So this enlightened mind being one that's free from greed, hatred, and delusion. A very mysterious, sounds very straightforward when you say a mind that's free of greed, hatred and delusion, but it's very mysterious. And the more we explore it, we see the vastness of that mind. But I always keep going back to the Buddha's life because I get a lot of inspiration looking at the Buddha's life and his journey. So, and maybe from there we get a glimpse at how meaning kind of evolved within Buddhism. So basically what I'm saying so far is that in order to do good in the world, there feels like there needs to be some underlying meaning and value to kind of prolong that and be of help to others. And then also that brings a sense of community as well, a sense of if there's a common values, common meaning that people can unify together and bring that about in the world. And also these Sanghavastus, these means of unifications, it is said that it's what the Buddha, or what the Bodhisattva, I'm trying to avoid too many terms, but the Bodhisattva being, green Tara can be a Bodhisattva where you are prolonging your kind of final enlightenment for the sake of all beings. So you wait till all other beings in the world are enlightened, and then you hold off on that, and then so you go about in the world trying to bring that about. And very hard to do that alone. So the Bodhisattva is like, I need to get people on board with this. So it's from that perspective that this means of unifications come about. So if we look at the Buddha's life, what's quite interesting, he had his own loss of meaning. Now I'm speaking generally here. Some of you might have a very strong sense of meaning in your lives, but I think it's really worth looking at where that is and then kind of following through on it. But the Buddha grew up in a very affluent part with his family in ancient India, and had a big palace and had everything he wanted. And he started questioning that. And eventually he left on a few occasions to seek something more, or just see what life was like beyond the palace walls. And he came across an old man, a sick man, and a dead man, or a dead person. And to him, that was waking him up to the facts of life, and that he spent his life so far kind of bumbling around, kind of enjoying the pleasures of life, but it needed something to wake him up to kind of seek beyond that. And then he saw a holy man, or a wandering ascetic at the time, seeking the truth, and he was very inspired by that. So he decided to renounce his life at the sadness of his family, and in a way, he renounced that, and he came and he started looking for the truth, and he came across a couple of teachers which he followed. He really looked up to them, learned their teachings, almost surpassed them, and then he decided that wasn't quite working, and then he tried other things, this kind of extreme practices of austerity, to kind of, he saw the body as an obstacle to something within us trying to reach higher. And then he decided, okay, that wasn't quite it. He put that down, and he went and he decided to try and meditate underneath the Bodhi tree, this tree in which he gained enlightenment. And I find that this part of the Buddha's life where he's seeking very exciting. Shantikara said I kind of up and left Dublin in my naivety, but it was, well, he didn't say naivety, I'm saying that. And I think because this part of the Buddha's life, there's something within us that responds to something more in life. We wouldn't be, if not, there's this, we'd be kind of fine. We'd get through life and we'd be happy about it and we'd carry on. But there seems to be some nagging thing, no matter how good our life is, there's this nagging feeling that there's something more. And I don't know, what's needed is to step out of our kind of daily lives, to step out from the kind of, metaphorically speaking, the groups that we kind of hem ourselves in, or the views of the world that we kind of are prisoner to, and kind of seek something more. Not everyone resonates with this. I've been very existentially challenged in my life so far, well, up until a point. Now I'm a bit more kind of sure of myself and what I'm doing. But this existential quest of what is, what's life about, I think it's really crucial. And it can be a bit unpopular to go around every time you meet up with someone. I have a tendency of doing this still. I meet up and we're just having a nice coffee and I'll just be like, what's it about? And then all of a sudden things get interesting for me. And you get to the crux, but so much of our lives is kind of staying on the surface. So kind of getting underneath that. What else is it represent? Also, this idea that he practiced this extreme austerities and then he decided to just take a step back. I think there's something in that for us, that we could be very sure of something. We take up a way of being in the world, a certain cause, and we have to keep an open mind to keep checking, is this the right thing? Because often we'll hold that to the grave. We put too much into the slot and we don't want to take a step back and say, actually, you know what, I got it wrong. These last 10 years, I've actually got it wrong. It's a very difficult thing to do. And but there's a real strength in being able to say, look, I've got it wrong and I'm going to leave that view behind and search something more, for something more. Yeah, and then what happened at this point, which is a crucial image in Buddhism and where we begin to see this beneficial activity begin. He gained enlightenment, the Buddha, and then what was mentioned at the break, I think, and Dharma Day represents this a lot. He had this decision, conundrum, his own conundrum. Should I try and teach this experience that words fail to describe? It's a wordless way of being, not having greed, hatred, or delusion. It seems too profound, too difficult to teach others. And then what's said is this kind of deity came. There's a lot of myth in Buddhism, and kind of plead with the Buddha to consider spreading the Dharma, what he has found or discovered. And then this vision appeared. And so it's involving, so you imagine yourself in, well, it could be any part of the world, but India, and there's this really hot weather. But then we've got this pond, or vast ocean almost, of muddy, kind of grimy water. And then deep down in the darkness of that, there is mud and slime, barely any light, no light really. But then within that there's a lotus seed. So I don't know if people have seen lotuses. They've got quite beautiful flowers that open up, and a lot of the Buddhist figures look like green Tara sitting on an opened lotus. And through this deep, dark, grimy water, there's this lotus seed. And then it's almost like it's been there for eternity. It feels like that. A total silence, an abysmal silence around it. It's almost been strained by its environment. But then all of a sudden there's a shaft of light comes through the pond that's able to reach deep down into the darkness and stillness. And that starts to free the seed a bit. It starts to grow. It responds to that light. and it starts to untangle itself. And what's a kind of twilight world underneath this deep dark pond, this light comes in like a sword, like an emerald sword, just slashing through. And you have this water slowly turning amber, turning brighter. And then the seed starts bursting through, it starts flowering, it starts coming up. Occasionally the weeds try to tuck it back down again, but it keeps going through and it's responding. And as it gets closer to the surface, it starts to feel the warmth of this light. And then it eventually gets to the top, and it can almost see the light or feel the warmth of the light. And then at one final put, it pushes through the top of the pond or the ocean or vast whatever environment it's in. And then the bud is still tied together, and again this warm light keeps encouraging, and then eventually it blossoms out forward into its full potential. And so this is the image that the Buddha saw before him. Actually, I'll just stop there for a moment and just I always like a bit of interaction. What do people think this light is? To actually look into this image. So we've got this seed, and we've got all sorts of quite crippling environment, and then you've got a light coming through.
The truth.
The truth, yeah. Yeah.
Suffering, first of all.
Okay, so which part of the image, suffering?
Suffering, I mean, we are born, we suffer, and we die, and how to relieve that suffering by being kind to others, to ourselves.
Yeah.
That's how I see it.
Yeah, so this kind of, you could see this mud, this kind of weeds going around the sea. There's quite the suffering in life almost, the kind of the conditions that can kind of hold us down.
That's what defines us.
Yeah. Even Siri's interested. Anyone else?
Metta. Maybe for me it's like a teacher.
Okay, yeah.
Things that like reached me was just being like, there's a person that I'm listening to them and this makes sense. And I also really like the vibe of this person generally.
Yeah. Actually, you've all covered the 3 points I've got there. Really good. Which actually goes to show there's something intuitive about it. You might be hearing all this and like, well, yeah, of course it's this or that, but there's something quite valuable in that. So we heard the truth, so we could see the light as wisdom almost, that the truth of reality pierces through, and it almost needs that sword-like wisdom kind of penetrate through all the darkness. Often images of wisdom is light penetrating darkness. We're left in ignorance and we need something to come through. And then metta was mentioned, or you could say compassion, so that even the warmth, it's almost like at the end the warmth starts coming through, and that encourages the lotus to open up. And then you could see it as the teachings, the Buddha's teachings. And when I first heard the image, I did think of it like that here's a kind of, when we hear the Dharma sometimes, it can be pretty straightforward, but it does seem like a burst of light kind of coming through, a kind of a relief almost that there is a way out of this muddy pond. And to say a bit about those, I think from this then the Buddha, you could see the enlightened mind penetrating this darkness. I'm going into unfamiliar terrain here because it's quite mysterious. I think there's something quite crucial in what's happening in this connection between the mud and the slime and the light. They're all part of the one image. They're not. It's almost like the mud is. It's part of the image. It's almost necessary to. You need that soil in order to grow up. So all the difficulties in life, we really want them to go away. I know the Buddhism teaches that there is suffering and there's a path beyond suffering. If we're not careful, we will try to ignore the suffering. But it's almost like if you can turn towards that and use it as fuel for growth, it's really positive. And one image which has been said a lot, you could see, let's say that the light is say, the Buddha's teaching or this enlightened being or the Bodhisattva's influence, it almost needs this mud and slime to be perfuming its awareness. So until the Buddha saw that there was suffering in the world, it's almost like compassion didn't arise until that point. So it's almost like the suffering of the world was perfuming this awareness of an enlightened mind, and then the response is compassion. And then, to use the same image but flip it, you've got us here, say, deluded in the world, we don't quite know what's going on, but then something higher, this light is perfuming our awareness. So there's something deep in our being that is responding to the highest in the universe. And it's very tempting to separate kind of the suffering of the world and then these high states that go beyond suffering. But I think a clue is to kind of see them as not so separate, that they're an interplay between each other. Yes. And this seed opening up, it's this gradual awakening within us of wisdom and compassion. So what we've got here is the wisdom and compassion of the enlightened mind. And with this responding to the suffering, the only thing the Buddha could do is respond with by doing good, by helping others. So there's the kind of, for me, the crux, the beginning of beneficial activity in Buddhism. It's this point where the Buddha realized that beings are suffering. He's gone beyond suffering, but he needs to help others. And if we have one without the other, it gets a bit imbalanced. So let's say you've got wisdom, but without compassion. So if you've managed to detach yourself from the world and you're not suffering, but you're not responding to others around you, trying to help them in the world, it can be a bit indifferent. And in a certain way, not very kind. It's almost like this can happen to sometimes when you first come across Buddhism, because it gives teachings of impermanence, of no self, and you can take that prematurely. And someone might be suffering, say they've lost a loved one, or they're quite ill, but you think you've got some wisdom element, and you go up and say, well, it's not going to last. You'll pass through it. It's not quite empathetic or kind of compassionate. Or there's no self anyway, so what is there to be sad? All this kind of stuff. I listened to a lot of Alan Watts growing up, or when I was, he was this philosopher. It's good stuff, quite poetic, but a lot of it is divorced a bit from actually being empathetic with others. It can often get lost in thought or these abstract ways, teachings. But then you have the other side, so it's interesting. Obviously, we've spoken about compassion, doing good, being very key in the world. But if you don't have wisdom with that, you might help, but you won't alleviate the root cause of suffering. I think this is really key, and Buddhism would say the root cause is this grasping of the mind, this kind of seeing ourselves as kind of fixed, and kind of keep grasping after things outside of us to fulfill this dukkha, this suffering that we feel. And I don't know, for me, there's many great causes in the world to give time and energy to. But again, I'm of a temperament to keep going back to the foundation of the issue. Where is the actual issue lying? And if we manage to somehow miraculously solve all the issues in the world, that would be great. But I still believe there will be still the issue of how to be in the world and interpersonal ways of being. So without this kind of wisdom element, this sword-like wisdom piercing through all the other mud and mire of existence, we won't be able to really act beneficially. Because the ultimate thing of the Bodhisattva is trying to alleviate suffering. So we need to be discerning, we need to have our wits about us when we're trying to do good in the world, because we don't want to be just a busybody do-gooder. Like, it would have been very easy to give a talk here about all the good things we could do in life. But we know all that. Like, we know how to be good. The thing is, we're not quite integrated enough to actually do that fully, and we need people around us who are also trying to do that. So this, it's interesting what then happened. So the Buddha, after a period of time, then left the Bodhi tree, left the place where he gained enlightenment. And the first thing he does, he goes to seek his friends or old friends who, previous in the story, would have disowned him because he started practicing a different way to them. And he doesn't decide to preach, he decides to actually go and meet people and communicate face to face. And to me, there's something about actually meeting one-on-one with people. I kind of said this already, but you can really quickly start getting to the root cause. The more people you speak to, you can't help but speak in generalizations. You can't help but just give a broad overview of something, but it can often not be acutely aware of that person in front of you. So there's a real communication happening. And after having this vision, the main thing is like, right, to do good in the world, I need to go to other people that I knew before, and I'm going to help them transform themselves. So this transformation from the lotus seed to the blossoming lotus above the water, that's the key thing that the Buddha was interested in. And he'll do it by any means possible. Obviously that came across in which have been passed down in particular teachings, and the first teaching he gave was the Four Noble Truths. But that might be on paper the first teaching, but if you think of the context, the other teaching in that is he's being very aware of the person opposite to him, his friends he's teaching. He's very caring, compassionate, wanting to alleviate. You don't get that in the lists sometimes in Buddhism. You get very good ideas, but if you think of the context of the Buddha giving that teaching, it was in a loving way, a very generous way. So, yeah, and he was also trying to inspire his friends. So I love that story, which I'm sure you'll hear. David Mitra might go into it next week, so do come back next Sunday, because this moment when one of his friends also realizes enlightenment, and he shouts, "Kundanya knows, Kundanya knows." So just what his friend, his disciple, ends up being his disciple, gains what the Buddha gained. And yeah, it's very, I'm very grateful for that moment in the Buddha's life, because we wouldn't have the teachings, wouldn't have passed down. In a certain sense, that's his first attempt at unifying the Sangha. He then has a Sangha to unify around, because he starts communicating the teachings. And also another important thing with doing good, it's a natural way of being for the Buddha. It's not an idea. He can't help but respond by doing good. It's very whole in that sense. But for us on this side of enlightenment, it's going to feel sometimes we're trying to do good and we feel a bit resentful because someone isn't thanking us enough, or we're trying to be generous but the bank account is a bit low and we're a bit concerned about that. We have to just kind of embrace it, right? We are starting this journey, and where is our kind of way out of this kind of mud and mire? So in order to apply this thing of doing good, I kind of came with the image in mind. There's something about with this lotus seed, we need to look up first of all. So this thing around meaning, if it is an issue for you around meaning, start to look around, search for some sort of meaning, either inward. Obviously meditation is crucial in Buddhism. We can look from our own experience, but also what our teachers are saying around us. So we need to look up and look to see if there's light. If we have a feeling that there's light that can help penetrate whatever's going on for us, we have to do so by looking up. We almost want to gesture looking up. And then the next thing, we need to grow up. So there's a a kind of willing. If we do respond to something, then all of a sudden it can feel sometimes that ignorance is bliss, because once you do look up, you'll find something, and then that means you need to respond to it. Your being is like, oh gosh, I need to respond. There's responsibility kicks in, and you can see that as a real positive challenge to work on ourselves, work on our mind. When we're meditating, we're doing a metta bhavana area, we're working on bringing about loving kindness, metta in our lives. Or if we're doing a mindfulness of breathing practice, we're working on concentrating the mind so that we can be in the world in a more effective way. And but we use all the manure, but I'm a farmer from the past, so we use the manure and all the dirt in our favour as best we can. We embrace life as best we can. So we look up, we grow up, and then we get above the water and we have to open up. So the final, we need to be open to and be receptive to this light, this wisdom, compassion, to the Buddha's teachings, to the truth. Having receptivity in our practice is really key. And it's not like you just do one and then you do the other. It's all kind of playing out together at the same time. And then lo and behold, if you do that, you'll naturally start doing good in the world. And you do that in the context with other people. That's my experience. I can only speak from experience. But I haven't been too concerned about actively trying to do good. I've stayed true to actually what's going on for me. But I need to do it within, for me, the Sangha, in a community of other practitioners. And it's amazing how natural, all of this image of growth is very natural in the end. Yes, it feels like we have to do quite a lot to work on our minds. But the end product with the Buddha, he's just being himself. He doesn't have an idea of himself. His whole being has changed by working on his mind and by engaging with life in a particular way. And I think that can relieve a lot of undue pressure that we need to be a certain way or need to be someone in particular. We just have kind of trust in the practices, particularly in meditation and ethics, and reflecting on any wisdom teachings, any Dharma talks you respond to. And it's not that we're trying to get something to acquire onto ourselves. It's just by doing that, our whole being changes. And we might find that we're naturally want to do good. It's an interplay, because obviously a bit of that is also actively trying to be generous and loving. But kind of trust that natural response a bit more. And the more relaxed you are in your being around your friends, your family, colleagues, or in the centre, the more of benefit you can be to the world. And then what comes out of that is a very joyous life in the end. I've been quite struck with how grateful I am for my life these last few years, because I've been given something which goes all the way back to the Buddha, his stepping out and teaching for the first time. And there's a very important aspect in Buddhism, which is rejoicing. And it's almost like rejoicing in the good done by others. So rejoicing in it in yourself and rejoicing in it by the people around you. And being really feeling into any sense of gratitude. And there's this lovely, if you're familiar, some of you mightn't be, we do a ritual here sometimes, the sevenfold puja, which is 7 verses of kind of worship, reverence to the Buddha or to this enlightened mind that we aspire to. And there's one section was the confession section. So you're getting to grips with all the mud and the slime in our lives. And then immediately after, there's the rejoicing section. So it's kind of letting go of all that. And I'll just end with that first. So how it goes is, hopefully remember, I rejoice with delight in the good done by all beings, through which they obtain rest with the end of suffering. May all those who have suffered be happy. I rejoice in the release of beings from the sufferings of the rounds of existence. I rejoice in the nature of the Bodhisattva and the Buddha and the teaching and the will, who are protectors. I rejoice in the arising of the will to enlightenment and the teaching, those oceans that bring happiness to all beings and are the abode of welfare of all beings. to me, that's kind of embodies this the life of the Buddha, kind of reaching out, doing good in the world, and then this response of kind of joy and rejoicing. So yeah, I'll leave it there.